Which defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys is on the verge of stardom? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Cowboys listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast is exclusive, includes engagement. Use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, what's going on, sir?
Not much. I'm excited to talk defensive tackles. I really think that this is one of the positions that, we really could see a whole bunch of improvement, and because we have a lot of young players, some new players here. So I'm kind of excited to kind of sort that all out because I do think it shows some bright future ahead, hopefully.
Yeah, we should also mention that this is going to be our last show of the week. We'll come back on Monday and Tuesday, continuing with our defensive end preview. We'll get to linebackers later next week. Maybe some free agency news if the Cowboys actually make a move. We've been saying that every week, but
they got to work with us on that deal. That's on them at this point.
Yeah.
Not us.
No, I will say this is about the time last year that the Cowboys brought in Malik Hooker. So not completely unrealistic to think that they could sign somebody. We've started to see a little bit more free agent movement over the last couple of weeks, but we'll get into that if it ever happens. Let's talk about the defensive tackles today. Yeah. But what are just your general thoughts on this group kind of going into training camp?
Well, it felt like last year going into camp and everything that they had, kind of similar sort of a lot of questions, a lot of questions as to what the defensive tackle position was going to look like, what the answers that the Cowboys had on hand was going to provide for them, and I think that short of a borderline miraculous start by Odighizuwa, I think they would have been in real trouble last year, especially after Gallimore's elbow injury. Fast forward to where we are now, you've had a very promising first year for Odighizuwa. Gallimore was able to come in the latter part of the season and give you some good snaps at times, but now he's fully healthy. You got another year to kind of roll the dice. Let's see what you get out of Tristan Hill. You got a promising young rookie in Ridgeway and Bohanna coming back after a year in the weight room. I think that the Cowboys are just in a much better spot at the position a year later, if only for the fact that these younger players now have another year of experience underneath their belt, and you have a couple guys that you're hoping that could really, really break out in Gallimore and Odighizuwa.
Yeah, I just want to remind people that early on in the season, the Cowboys played a lot of Quinton Bohanna. I'm looking at an early season game against the Chargers. Bohanna played 28 snaps. You had Brent Urban played 44 snaps in this game, 40 snaps for Carlos Watkins, 61 snaps for Osa Odighizuwa. They were pretty depleted already, even after the Gallimore injury. Tristan Hill still working his way back from the PUP list. And they survived, right? And I think you feel a lot better about the depth kind of going into this season with guys being healthy. You also added somebody in the draft in John Ridgeway. I just think we're in a much better spot now.
Yeah, there was just frankly no dynamism at the defensive tackle position last year. And you talked about it, like guys like Urban and Watkins. They were throwing these snaps at these guys just to kind of hold up inside, but relying on the Randy Gregory's, the Mike Parsons, and the DeMarcus Lawrence's to be the ones to actually provide pressure of any kind. And anything that Odighizuwa was able to kind of provide in those first few weeks, that was all that they got out of the defensive tackle position.
I want to also mention, Justin Hamilton played 250 snaps on defense for this team last year because they were just so decimated.
And he was solid, like that's
solid.
the thing is that like they had a comfortable floor. I feel like with the defensive tackles they had, it wasn't like there's been Cowboys seasons where they've had nothing at defensive tackle, and it showed. And I think that that at the end of the year it did kind of rear its ugly head, especially when you're playing San Francisco. And there were definitely times when teams were able to run the football on the Cowboys that they really concentrated on it. But it certainly wasn't as bad as it has been at certain points. And again, now that we are where we are, I kind of feel I'm interested to see what happens in training camp, because I think that you've got some interesting players who, with again another year in the system, could be much better, and then you've got some young guys who you're still kind of seeing, like Ridgeway, that you're kind of still waiting to see exactly what you can get out of him this year.
Were you referring to the 2013 Cowboys that played Nick Hayden, Landon Cohen, Everett Dawkins, Drake Nevis, Marvin Austin, Corey Irvin, Jerome Long, and Frank Kurse, and David Carter at defensive tackle?
Marvin Austin, man. Do you remember Marvin Austin taking significant snaps as a defensive tackle for this team? Because I do. It's seared in my brain, and it's only 10 years ago. So, yeah, that is one of the years I'm certainly referring to. But, I mean, frankly, the Cowboys, we talked about it, right? Like,
it's so bad, man.
How often have the Cowboys, like, consistently – I mean, how often have they had years where they've had a solid defensive tackle rotation?
Oh,
they've barely had an average defensive tackle to play on this team at times.
Do you remember how excited we were in 2014 when they had Ken Bishop and Devon Coleman, and Josh Brent was going to play for a little bit, and they had Terrell McClain? It was a big deal. We did podcasts on Terrell McClain, how excited we were about Terrell McClain playing an average defensive tackle.
Terrell McClain was it was like an oasis in the desert.
It was like Aaron Donald for the Cowboys when we had.
Yeah, it was like it was. And look, I mean, again, Terrell McClain played some good snaps for you, but dealt with a whole bunch of injuries. Brent dealt with his situation. But that's the thing, is that they got some guys who. Okay, David Irving is a very similar situation. Brought in a couple of different guys to play at different times. But whatever reason, it just never worked out. Injury, off-field stuff, so hopefully the Cowboys, they're solving the problem at this point with numbers, I think. And they have several different guys that they could anticipate breaking out and really helping this room.
All right, we're going to get to all the players and kind of break down where they're at heading into the season. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local auto parts store to stock up on all the parts that you need. But Rock Auto has everything from engine control modules and brake parts to motor oil and even new carpet. Whether it's your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. Best of all, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low. So go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. All right, Lane, let's start running through some of these players. Let's start with the starters. Neville Gallimore, probably their most talented defensive lineman on the team. Certainly he's got the most athletic upside. What are you expecting from him in year 3?
Well, first of all, it's just good to see him be healthy, at least for now. I mean, he didn't get actually injured until was it training camp or was it week 1?
It was in the preseason. He got hurt in a meaningless preseason game, which was frustrating.
That was really frustrating. There was a lot of talk about him, breaking out and having really, really a nice training camp. So it was frustrating because, again, we just talked about the Cowboys have had real problems, filling out their defensive tackle depth chart. So when he got hurt, obviously there was a lot of shifting of the onus onto Odighizuwa and a lot of focus there. But, Gallimore is a guy who came into the league as kind of just a very athletic defensive tackle, played in that kind of unusual OU defense. Kind of had him playing in different spots and maybe a little bit out of position, especially considering what he would end up playing for the Cowboys. So he's had a year of transition into the NFL, started to show us a little something last year, got the injury, which kind of obviously threw him off track. He was able to come back a little bit later in the season and show you something, but it still, isn't quite what the promise was that we had kind of going into the season last year. Now here we are. He's had a full healthy off season and apparently put on 60 pounds of pure muscle from what we've been told. Look, I think the first thing with him is, where's his weight at? Like what? I mean, it sounds like he's had a good offseason. He's put on a lot of good weight. I'm not questioning what kind of shape he's in. I'm asking, how much does he weigh? Like, what position is he going to be playing? Is he going to be shifting more into kind of a one technique role where he can play a little bit more inside and then kick out on pass rushing downs? Or is the idea that he's just going to play at 3 technique at, 315 to 320 pounds, which is certainly, not outside the realm of possibility, but it's just interesting to think about, where he, what his portfolio, I guess, is going to look like next season at that weight, and how that interplays with the other young defensive tackle that you're excited about, Odighizuwa.
I think he's got the most pass rush upside of anybody in this defensive tackle room, right? I mean, he runs the 4.7s, which is still, at least he did when he was 290 pounds, not 330 or
whatever he is.
Whatever he is. It's just more consistent because we haven't seen him yet in the NFL have a game where he has more than 2 pressures. Like, you see flashes of it, right? And you can see him get up the field a couple times and jump a snap, and he can be disruptive. It's just we haven't seen him put together a full game, and that's what I really want to see from him in year 3. Let's talk about probably the other starter, Osa Odighizuwa. We talk about him a lot on this podcast. Thought he started the season off really well, and then he just wore down. But going into year 2, what can we expect from Double O?
I am actually more excited about Odighizuwa than I am about Gallimore, and that's nothing against Gallimore. I just think that Odighizuwa's athletic profile is unique in a way that I think is going to be problems for the NFL teams once he kind of develops. He has length that you just don't see at the position, especially for a guy who truly fits a kind of defensive tackle position. I mean, he's strong. He's so
strong.
His strength combined with his leverage is why he was able to play. I don't know, maybe you have the snaps in front of you, but he played 700 plus snaps of nose tackle, I think. Or not, maybe not nose tackle specifically, but he played so many snaps for a defensive tackle rookie. And
643 snaps. Now, the Cowboys did a better job as the season went on of limiting his snaps, but there was a stretch there where he was playing 41, 41, 49, 49, 39, 40 snaps. It's too much for a guy that had to play basically every week.
And he showed you some stuff. I think, look, a 285-pound guy playing nose tackle in the NFL, you better have really good leverage and really good strength. And he showed you that he has those things. He has these long arms as well. He's getting better with his hands. His quickness is certainly good enough to be a threat as a pass rusher. So I actually think he may have just as much pass rush upside as Gallimore, maybe more, depending on how well he's able to develop. So I think that what you're looking at for Odighizuwa is that, okay, you played 640 snaps, mostly all kind of condensed into the front part of the season.
Yep.
How do you take that? Take that tape, go improve in the off season, make yourself better. And what areas are you growing in? And I imagine he's probably put on some weight as well. I think playing at 285 pounds, especially between the guard and the center, is incredibly difficult. So I would imagine he's probably closer up to 290, but still with that same level of explosion. Yep. And then we'll see exactly how they deploy them. But I really do think that the Cowboys are, yes, I agree with you that they have to be excited with this combo, this pairing that they have. They haven't had a pairing of defensive tackles in a long time. Yeah. And so the fact that they've got these two and then a couple other guys behind them that they may have some hope for really, really, really does bode well. And then I think you add in, before we get into kind of the rest of the guys, you talk about the starters, right? You have these two guys that you like. And then if you're talking about pass rush interior, we won't go into these guys, but I think we need to mention at this kind of in this juncture that they're going to get a lot of pass rush reps from the defensive tackles that are kicking inside, whether it's Golson or Basham or whomever.
Maybe some Lawrence. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. They will get some snaps from some of these guys rotating in. So that will help increase the efficiency, I think, of some of the defensive tackles, because they're not going to take all those snaps. And then you hopefully get some help from some of these down roster defensive tackles who are able to kind of kick in certain packages and certain deployments that'll help also just kind of take some of the wear and tear off of those other top two guys' body.
One more thing about Osa before we move on. I talked about Gallimore never having a game with more than 2 pressures. Osa Odighizuwa had 5 games last year with 4 or more pressures.
Yeah.
I mean, I might just be wrong. Maybe Osa's the guy that has more pass rush upside. I mean, you look at the athleticism, you still figure that Gallimore could maybe put it together once he starts to play more. But, man, Osa did pretty well creating pressures last year. Now, he did really slow down as the end of the year went on.
Yeah, absolutely.
In his last 4 games, he had just 4 total pressures. And I also think you saw him as a run defender start to slow down. Like I just think he got worn down from the entire process of, the being a draft pick and getting ready for the draft, and then the offseason, and then playing all these snaps at one technique and nose tackle. But if he can play the way he did in the first, 6-7 games of the season, we're talking about a pretty good player here, Landon.
Absolutely. He's a guy that also got ground up a lot at training camp because they were trying to give these rookies a lot of snaps to get him ready. They didn't know that they were going to actually need him to play a large lion's share of the snaps early on in the season. So I think, going straight from a very serious grind of training camp into the regular season where you're suddenly playing, a rookie defensive tackle playing more than 20 snaps a game is ridiculous. And he was playing 40 plus in multiple games. So, I think it really wore him out. And again, when you're undersized a little bit, that can really kind of also cause an issue as well. So
if you had to bet on one of these two players becoming like a borderline Pro Bowl player in 2022, would you bet on Osa?
Yes, I would. That's my preference because I think while you're correct that Neville Gallimore is kind of objectively a better athlete, I actually think the combination of skills that Osa has in his length, his ability, his flexibility, which causes the low leverage that is really makes his life difficult for whoever he's going against. I think those combination of skills really, really add up to something special, and that's why I love these guys that are like the ex-wrestler types that are built like that because they understand leverage, they understand how to make their bodies flexible to the point where they can get low. And when you're low and explosive and you've got long arms, that's really, really hard to stop inside. And that's why I think he has real talent that could really develop.
All right, let's talk about the rest of these guys. But before we do that, we got to tell you about a great new product from Built Bar. It's Brownie Chunk Built Bar, but it's the puff version, which is absolutely incredible. That's right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love, and a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listening. They are also good for you. Only 150 calories, but 17 grams of protein. Go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKEDON to get 10% off your order. I promise you these are not going to last very long because my wife absolutely loves them. Already ordered a couple boxes. You can enjoy them guilt-free because they are good for you. Again, built.com, promo code LOCKEDON to get 10% off your next order. All right, let's run through the rest of these defensive linemen. Let's start with Carlos Watkins, who's probably going to play the most snaps after Gallimore and Osa. Watkins joined the team last year. What are you expecting from him this year?
Yeah, Watkins kind of had the inverse Odighizuwa season, right? Where it felt like he really struggled out of the gate and didn't play great football early on, and really, was kind of a liability at different points. Was one of the spots of the team that in the early part of the season where the Cowboys were playing really good football, that he was actually kind of a little bit of a disappointment. Not that a ton was expected of him, but it's just in a spot where the Cowboys were already thin, he wasn't exactly giving them great snaps early on, it felt like. But then as the season wore on, especially at the end of the year, he really started playing good football.
Well, I also think it helped when they started to limit his snaps. They played him far too many snaps. I kind of think he's one of these defensive linemen, like once you get past 30 snaps for him, the play just really drops off.
Diminishing returns. I think you're right. And I think that maybe – I wonder if that says something also about Odighizuwa, that he is a guy that you can give a high number of snaps, once he's kind of made his way into, being ready for a whole season. Yep. But anyways, going back to Watkins, I think, you look at what he was able to do a little bit as a kind of rotational defensive tackle, and he did provide like a solid player against the run. He's not ever going to be a pass rusher. He's not ever going to be a guy that you're going to get, 5-6 sacks from. But again, in the Cowboys scheme, where Quinn is going to have these guys lining up in all different techniques, they're going to have all kinds of different looks up front. As we start to kind of go through the deeper part of the depth chart, we'll talk about this a little bit more. But guys like Carlos Watkins, who can play the one technique, he can play three, he can play a five, he can play a 4-eye, he can play all the techniques all the way from the center's nose all the way into the inside of the tackle's shoulder. So I think guys like that are increasingly valuable as a way to make sure that your defense is fundamentally sound while deploying the more dynamic aspects of your defense wherever you need them in order to attack an offense.
One of the bigger wild cards of the entire defense is Tristan Hill, who missed the first, I think it was 9 weeks last year, coming back from that knee injury. His game against the Raiders, which I just watched a couple of days ago, the Thanksgiving game, he was phenomenal. I mean, he was so good as a run defender in that game. And then he gets suspended afterwards because he punched a Las Vegas Raider, comes back against Washington and plays one of the worst games I've seen him play. Just was so bad in terms of discipline. But against Philadelphia in Week 18, plays well again. He's healthy now. It's year 4 in the system. He's only 24 years old. Like, he's about a full year younger than Neville Gallimore, same age as Osa. What are we expecting from him in year 4?
Well, that's the question, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the problem, is that you just described him perfectly with that. It's that he entices you with these flashes and then he misses 6 weeks with a knee injury, or and you can't blame a guy for missing time with a knee injury, but it's always something, right? It's always he's missing time. He punched a dude, so he got like 4 suspensions. It's like,
do you know how many snaps he's played in his 3 years in the NFL?
I bet it's less than 1,000.
527.
Oh my God! I mean, that's crazy. Like,
especially played about 150 more snaps last year than what Tristan Hill is in his entire career.
Yeah, and like, this is a second-round pick, So look, he has a physical skill set that is appetizing, and especially for what this team wants to do, because I do think that he is one of these guys who he is the rare player on this defensive tackle room who I think could and should be deployed similarly to Watkins, where he can play all up and down the line. But he's the only one of those guys who has any kind of level of dynamism to his game, right? Like, I think that if he could figure it out, he would be an incredibly valuable third defensive tackle, because I think he can play both the 1 and the 3 very well. And maybe, if he could find some consistency to his game, play them, in a positive manner, not just as a guy taking up snaps. So I still think that there's obviously incredible upside with Tristan Hill. I question his headspace, only based on what we've seen him do, only based on the fact that he's constantly getting into fights. He seems very confrontational. I love the attitude. I love the guy that plays with no gloves. I love the guy that is angry at the media for no reason. Like, I think that I honestly think that the Cowboys need more of those guys. But I also need that guy to play football like his demeanor is off the field, and frankly on the field when the snap's not going on. Right. So if he could play at a level of consistency that we haven't seen from him yet, we've seen the flashes. We just need to reduce the amount of time between the flashes with him.
He has the highest range of possibilities for the Cowboys this year. Absolutely. Because I could see a scenario where he dominates in training camp with the preseason. He's your starting 3 technique. Week 1 against Tampa Bay. I can also see a scenario where he's just not on the roster, and it's not even really close. And we're doing a camp cut down show. Hey, Tristan Hill got cut, and we don't even really spend that much time on him because he hasn't been a factor. So again, a true wild card in that defensive line room. A couple other guys, and we're just going to mention these guys together because I think they're competing for one spot. Quinton Bohanna and then John Ridgeway, 2 0 techniques, nose tackles, whatever you want to call them, probably fighting for one roster spot.
Yeah, maybe. I think that doesn't sound unreasonable. It really depends on exactly how much they plan on varying up their fronts this year. Maybe what they want to do is play 2 of these guys and play like a 2-4 or something like that. So they may have plans for both of these, but I don't think that you're being wrong. I don't think you're wrong necessarily that they from the outside looking in, just based on the way they played last year, that they're likely playing for one spot because they just didn't use a true nose tackle that often. They played so much nickel and there's just, it was really kind of more of a mix-up scheme that they would start playing those kind of bigger guys inside. So, Bohanna is a guy who came in, he was basically a guy you threw snaps at. He was the bottom of the roster defensive lineman, and he's a seventh round pick rookie, so that's not frankly shocking that he didn't play as well as Josh Brent was the number 9 Justin Hamilton. Hamilton may not have been a draft pick, may not have a lot of pedigree, but he had been playing in the NFL for years and had played a lot of snaps, so he had some experience. And Bohanna wasn't exactly able to ever really kind of take away snaps from Hamilton. A year in the training room, we'll see exactly what kind of shape he's in, but it doesn't sound like he's going to give up that job lightly to Ridgeway. And Ridgeway is a guy that they basically, drafted a brawler essentially to come in
to start fights in training camp is really what they did.
That's it. It seems like it. And so far, so good, buddy. And so I think he's a guy that you need. Again, like I want the guys that don't want to wear gloves. I want the guys that want to fight all the time. Like those are the guys I want. Need somebody to have the attitude, have the pride, to have the physicality to stop. What happened to us in San Francisco early in the game last year.
You have some pride, and I think you're getting your butt kicked, right?
And not be afraid to kick the butt of your teammates to get into gear and to play this game. So, I'm excited for Ridgeway and for as far as Bohanna goes, I'm excited to see Ridgeway push Bohanna, and let's see what those two guys can do and may the best man win. And if both of you guys look good, maybe they find a spot for both of these guys. But I think that the way that we played last year, it seems likely that the best man will get the spot. And then maybe they try to stash the other guy somehow.
That's the thing is, I think because Ridgeway was a higher pick, he went to the Senior Bowl. My guess is he's going to make the roster, and Bohanna is going to be an option for the practice squad. I mean, there's just not a big market for 350-pound nose tackles that don't give you much of a pass rush and are even kind of average as run defenders. But we'll see. If Bohanna had a great offseason and he comes in 25 pounds lighter and he can move a little bit, would surprise me if he makes the roster at all. Well, we'll check in on that one. Last question about the defensive tackles before we head out. Do you think this is a spot where the Cowboys would be wise to bring in a veteran? Whether that's a big name like Eddie Goldman or Ndamukong Suh, do you think they need another body going into training camp?
I don't think we know yet. I think this is another spot where we should probably get in a couple weeks of training camp first, and, especially at defensive tackle, right? Because it's hard to make any kind of snap judgments without pads on, right? Yeah. So they need to see these guys take some snaps in pads, see what they have in place. The good news is that you got Zach Martin. So it's a pretty good measuring stick for
you'll find out pretty quick, right?
You'll find out pretty quick if these guys can play. So I think that, I wouldn't imagine that this is a spot that the Cowboys would be shopping for before training camp. Now, once training camp gets in there, Bohanna doesn't look good. Ridgeway doesn't look like the player that they thought he was.
Or you have an injury or two, right?
Or Hill is not someone that you're thinking. I mean, you could potentially, depending on how situations shake out, you could be looking for a rotational 1 technique. You could be looking for a backup 3 technique. You could be looking for a starter at 1 technique if things, don't go well. So I do think it's possible that you look around here. But I think the Cowboys have tons of numbers right now. They need to find out what they have and the guys they have, and then they'll likely turn around and try to go shopping, maybe even after week 1 where the veteran guarantee is kind of out of the way.
The good news is this is one spot in free agency that has some players available. Like if you want to go out and get a Starlot who got cut by the Bills, or a Linval Joseph. I'm looking at some other names right now. But there are, we mentioned Ndamukong Suh, we've mentioned Eddie Goldman. There are players out there that could come in and give you 25 to 30 snaps right away. Now, the problem is you're just not going to find guys that can come in and be really good run defenders and give you 6 sacks in a season. They're just not out there in free agency right now. But if you need bodies to just kind of get you through a month of the season without killing you, those guys are out there.
Yeah, and that provides a nice soft floor for the regular season, right? Like at the very least, you could go in with maybe an understaffed defensive tackle room that you hope is going to play up their upside, maybe a little slightly younger group than you would normally, knowing that if it doesn't work out, you just can sign one of these guys off the street. They can play the 15 to 20 to 25 snaps that you use a nose tackle, and then you go from there.
If they need some pass rush help, like Sheldon Richardson still out there as well. Trey Flowers, who's kind of like a 3-4 defensive end. I think he could play inside as a 3 technique. There are guys out there, but I don't think the Cowboys are going to be in a hurry to take away any of the snaps from their young guys. Again, they've got like 5 defensive tackles under the age of 25 that they all spent draft picks on. I think they want to see that. Plus, you mentioned Chauncey Golston, who's been lining up inside on all the pass rush situations. This isn't really the time to go out and sign somebody, at least not right now.
Not yet. We got to see what we've got first. And again, there's no rush. I mean, because not all these guys are going to get signed. You don't necessarily want to guarantee any veterans contract. So probably wait until after week 1, to be honest.
All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Now, make the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft Show your second listen. We have over 50 NBA insiders on the Odyssey Sports app. They've got draft experts from Locked On NBA, the big board, 5-episode show already underway to get you ready for the big draft on Thursday night. Go ahead and check out that show right now, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow this podcast, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Check us out over on YouTube. You can follow the show at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCool BCB, and I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you guys right back here on Monday.